probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Critch, but.
What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here. Summer school is back in session today. We are talking Oregon, and for that, I am bringing on my man, Matt Prehm of Duck Territory. Matt, welcome back to summer school, dude.
Hey, man. How's it going? It's nice warm weather. We're playing some golf, talking some football. Here we go.
Loving that. Maybe a little warmer here in Orlando. Today we had the feels like at 97. So
that's hot. We're not there. And school is actually still in session out here. So
we had a preschool graduation today. Took some photos. Like, let's take indoor photos.
I love it. I love it. Summer's here.
Really nice season for Oregon last year. 10-3 overall, 7-2 in conference play. We obviously would have liked to have won the conference title and made the playoff, but a pretty nice win for the Ducks as they kept Dan Lanning, and he did not. Not that I think he was definitely going to go to Alabama or anything like that, but he just shut it down with a quickness. Oregon fans had to feel pretty good about that, given what had happened with the prior two coaches who were at Oregon.
Oh, absolutely. This was a case where a year ago he was very adamant that he wasn't leaving anywhere, and Oregon fans kind of felt like, okay, this is true. Like he's not going to go to Washington if that job ever opened up, or he's not going to go to like a Penn State, like that secondary tier of schools. But it was always kind of like, well, let's see what happens though if Georgia or if Alabama, two places he's coached at, two places that have been basically the drivers of this sport for the last 10 or 15 years. What happens if they open up? Will he actually hold true? And when the Alabama job opened, and there was those reports out of Eugene that he was in town in Tuscaloosa and doing interviews and whatnot, like he quickly shut it down and made it very clear he is not going anywhere and is staying with Oregon. I think once that happened, there was like this calmness that kind of went over the fan base of like, we've got our guy and we know he's not going anywhere basically until his kids all graduate high school, because he's gone on record saying that. Like, we're tired of moving. We want our kids all to graduate from the same high school. And that would put it out for, as long as Oregon wants him, which why wouldn't they, for the next 10, 12 years at Oregon football. And there's now a sense of kind of, I don't want to say invincibility, but like they feel like, hey, there's nothing that's going to take our coach away from us now.
Absolutely. I had a chance to chat with Dan last year at Pac-12 Media Day, before the season. I kind of got the same feeling, dude. It's like he feels like he has what he needs there to win in spades, and the family thing, as you hit on, for sure. That he made sure to bring that up, early and often in the conversation. So obviously, a really good team last year, right?
Yeah.
Where, if anywhere, is this team noticeably better than last year? Like, oh wow, it's a lot better at this spot this year than it was last year.
I think you probably would look at receiver, and as crazy as that sounds, because you lost your best receiver in program history in Troy Franklin. He goes off to the NFL as a junior, a third-day draft pick with Broncos, reunites with Bo Nix. But you bring back Tez Johnson, who also was a 1,000-yard receiver. You add an Evan Stewart to replace Troy Franklin at that position. And then not only did they just add Evan Stewart, they also didn't get hit by the portal really hard at this position. They retained Tez. They retained Trayshawn Holden. They retained Gary Bryant Jr., who was Oregon's third starter during this past season with Tez and Troy Franklin. So you bring back both your other two starters. You bring back your top reserve in Trayshawn Holden. You were able to keep five-star Jerion Dickey, who redshirted this past year due to some injuries that he suffered in high school, and now looks like a totally different player. I mean, you want to look at like a guy who he showed up in June of 2023, and now what he looks like in April 27th when we saw him last in 2024. He looks like a totally different player physically and on the field too. He's going to have a hard time cracking the lineup because it's just so deep. And then from a recruiting standpoint, they added 4 guys, all of them dudes, Jeremiah McClellan's previously committed to Ohio State. Oregon was able to flip him, and then Ryan Pelham they took away from USC, and then they were able to keep Dylan Gresham and Jack Ressler from SoCal area, and they've loaded that position group up where Junior Adams, the receivers coach, when he was at Washington, and he recruited all those dudes that played the national championship, and then here at Oregon, he's got a reputation. He doesn't play more than 4 or 5 receivers in a game. That number, and he's even come out and said, like, we're probably going to have to expand that number because they've just got so much talent at that position group. And then I would also argue, like, defensive line. They bring back Jordan Birch. They added 2 guys in the portal that were huge pieces, and Derek Harmon from Michigan State, and then Jamari Caldwell from Houston. Oregon's coaches believe Caldwell's a potential day 1, day 2 draft pick. Harmon's got multiple years of eligibility, but is already on NFL draft boards. Jordan Birch is another day 1 type, day 2 type guy. And again, they lost Brandon Dorlus, their top guy, went in the third or fourth round of the NFL draft this past year. And this is one that they've got a lot of young guys that they've been waiting and developing the last year and a half. And I think a big reason why they didn't hit the portal so hard is because they've trusted their evaluations. And you look at the front 7 recruiting in the last 2 or 3 years, and it's chock full of 4- and 5-star defensive linemen.
Absolutely. So want to stick there with the defensive line for a minute. Getting Harmon also meant that that USC, which is now a conference rival again. Well, always was a conference rival, just a new conference with the Ducks going to the Big Ten, and obviously Colorado that Dan Lanning certainly seemed to enjoy poking them a little bit last year. Those 2 schools did not get that player. How big is it to add him? And then secondarily on the D line, when I watched Oregon last year, I liked their ability to play against the run with that front. And the one thing that kind of stood out to me was, like, do they have like a twitchy pass rusher, a guy that other teams are like really worried about? And there's something that I was watching that because you had pointed that out on Summer School last year. Yeah. Like, look, I don't know if they have a real. Do they address that, or do they feel like they'll be able to address the pass rush in a different way this year?
Yeah, there's no Kayvon Thibodeau, like that type of pass rush specialist on this team. I think there's a big belief within the program that a trio of sophomores, Tatum Tuioti, Mateo Ungale, and then Blake Purchase, those 3, there's a big belief that one, if not all 3 of them, will eventually kind of assume that twitchy elite pass rush specialist guy. I'm real curious to see what happens with Tatum Tuioti. This was a 3-4-star defensive end edge type prospect, played 3 years of high school football in Nebraska, and then went to Eugene when his dad moved there and played at one of the state's better high schools in Sheldon. And when he signed, everyone kind of looked at him as kind of like, this is coach's kid. He's probably a good player, but this is, maybe a guy that's a developmental player. He played as a true freshman and was really good. And then this spring, he took a huge step in his offseason training. He looks drastically different from a body type perspective of when he showed up in spring of 2023, to the point in the spring game, they were dropping him as an edge type guy into pass coverage, having him cover guys 15, 20 yards down the field. So I would argue, like, they probably still don't have that Kayvon Thibodeau. I think there's going to be a lot of simulated pressures. That's how they're going to get a lot of these sacks, is confusing the offensive line and the protections there. But if there's a guy that could maybe potentially kind of evolve into a sack specialist, it might be Tatum Tuioti.
So jumping back to the offense here, a little disjointed in my questioning. Apologize for that. Dylan Gabriel comes aboard. And I mean, from the outside, it seems like he has more similarities to Bo Nix than differences. I mean, the arm is okay, like decent for college, probably not an ideal NFL arm, but a guy that's played a bunch of ball. Is this offense going to look any different with Gabriel?
I don't think so. I think it'll be very similar to what they did last year. He is. Now, this is one like we never really could get the correct answer on with Bo Nix last year of, was it designed to not have him run as much in 2024 or 2023 as he did in 2022? Because he ran a lot more in 2022 than he did this past year. Gabriel has shown the ability, the willingness to try and run over dudes at UCF and at Oklahoma. So I think that could be an added benefit to the offense. We could see a new wrinkle there with a little bit more of Gabriel. And we should also note, like, the QB room is drastically different than it was last year, because last year it was Bo Nix, and then you had Ty Thompson, who was a serviceable backup, but never really lived up to expectations. And then after that, you had two true freshmen, also Novosad, who was a former 4-star, and then a walk-on, and Brock Thomas. This year, you have Gabriel, and his backup is a former 5-star recruit who has college experience in Dante Moore. So while you're not hoping or you're not counting or of an injury happening to Gillen Gabriel, if it does though happen, you have an established backup that has seen action at the high level of college football already in your system, and can maybe kind of slide in and be a good safety net if Gabriel gets knocked out for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So I would argue it's probably going to be similar to most degrees, but there might be a little bit more wrinkles here with some RPOs with Gabriel at quarterback.
That makes a lot of sense. Who is a guy on this team that you feel like doesn't get the love nationally, but when you guys are standing around waiting for practice to get over on the beat, it's like, oh, like this guy is a true stud. People don't know that.
Jordan James, the running back. Last year, 2 years ago, as a freshman, he was kind of their goal line, short yardage situation type back, led the team in rushing touchdowns as a true freshman. And then his sophomore year, this past year, he was going to be the number 3 back. And through the first 3 or 4 games, it was kind of like that's what was happening. He was producing, but he wasn't getting a lot of clips because they just had Bucky Irving, who got drafted, and then Noah Whittington. And then in that Colorado game, Whittington got hurt and was out for the year with a knee injury. And that opened the door for Jordan James to have a bigger workload. And I'm a firm believer that Jordan James will be a higher draft prospect than what Bucky Irving is. I think he's just simply better. And that's not to say Bucky Irving is a bad player, because he was tremendous. He was an elite back for the Ducks. Jordan's bigger. He's stronger. He's heavier. He is like a bowling ball. And I will not be surprised one bit when he gets the bulk of the carries this season. Whittington probably serves as his backup. And Jordan James will be in contention for an all-league honor in the Big Ten Conference. He'll be one of the better backs in the Big Ten next season. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if this time next year when we're doing this, we're talking about how do you replace Jordan James in the NFL draft, who left a year early.
Good problem to have, sure.
Yes.
So we already discussed receiver. We talked D-line, 2 very deep positions for the Ducks this year. Is there another position where you're like, oh, if they lose guys, not that you want to lose anybody, obviously, but like they're pretty much fine as far as like, hey, like they're just deep.
Yeah, they got a lot of options at cornerback.
Okay.
They went in and Jabbar Muhammad from Washington, their star corner. They brought him in. Cam Alexander from UTSA, a 3-year starter at the Group of 5 level. He has joined the program as well. And then they have Jalil Florence, who, Oregon's Chris Hampton, defensive back coach, came out and said, like, this is an NFL guy. He just has to now show it consistently to be able to get his name called. But he's got all the intangibles to be an NFL guy. And then, they've got Roderick Pleasant, who is an elite, track guy, also a really good football player, made a huge tackle in the USC game to kind of stem the tide there a little bit late of a potential comeback. They added the number 1 JUCO corner this past cycle. They've added a couple other guys from the high school ranks. Aaron Flowers is the big one. They've got a lot of talent at this position group. And honestly, like, you could look at it and say, like, well, Florence might not even start. He might not even keep his job as a starting corner this coming season because of the talent they were able to bring in through the portal and then from the high school JUCO ranks and then just developing their own players. And then I think it was also, real quick, I think it was also a pretty strong sign of how many guys Oregon targeted along the defensive line in the portal. only bringing in 2 when they lost like 6 or 7 guys at that position group this past offseason. They have recruited at a very impressive clip at that position the last 2 or 3 cycles. Multiple 5-star guys are in that room. They've been able to develop some guys. Mari Washington's another one. Maybe you're asking about who could surprise some people. Tony Tuioti said that the sophomore has NFL traits. Again, a guy that could get drafted down the road. It's just showing it. Called his hands like the heaviest hands he's seen at Oregon. Nose tackle, defensive tackle type players. So they've got a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball, which should surprise no one knowing their head coach's background.
No doubt about it. So position battles that you're most looking forward to in the fall?
Probably receiver, to see how the pieces fit with that group. Defensive line for the same reasons. Like they've got so many different combinations. It's weird, like, but like there's not really like a position that you say like, hey, this spot's up for grabs and it could be these 2 players. Like you've kind of got a clear indicator of who the starters are across the board. And now it's come down to, okay, well, who are their backups? Or, okay, we know these 4 guys are going to play at these 3 positions, but what are the combinations that we're going to see? I try not to be overly optimistic this far out into a season, but it's really hard not to be with Oregon. We talked about it before we started recruiting. Like there aren't any holes, and it's really hard to find holes with this team. It's on paper as talented probably as I've seen them since I've started doing this in 2009. They've got a lot of pieces on the puzzle right now, and they are going to have plenty of depth and ammunition to go far into this college football season. So like, it's not really an answer, but it's kind of like, I don't really think there are really any position battles. Maybe kicker, place kicker, like Atticus Sappington from Oregon State and Grant Meters, a redshirt freshman. But we're really having to like dig deep to find position battles.
And you look at this, Matt, they're not going to have to show a damn thing until October 12th when Ohio State comes. I mean, in my opinion, Boise State is a pretty good G5. Obviously, Oregon State lost a ton. UCLA lost a ton. Michigan State, again, lost a ton. In fact, Harmon now plays for Oregon. You get a bye week between UCLA and Michigan State. That sets up really nice for them to not show their hand hardly at all, and probably mix in a good amount of that depth that you've been speaking about. Where's the look? There's obviously there's the trip to Michigan. You host Ohio State. I think personally a trip to Wisconsin before playing Washington is kind of like not easy. Yeah. But is there a trap game on this schedule? You're like, this is sneakier than you realized.
That's the game I was going to mention.
The Wisconsin game.
Wisconsin won mid-November because, first of all, you don't know what the weather's going to be like. You know, in Wisconsin in November, you might get low 60s, high mid 50s day, and then 2 days later, it might be 34 degrees and snowing. So I think, and look, there's nowhere in the state of in what was formerly known as the Pac-12 outside of Colorado and Utah. There's no places else in the conference that kind of replicate that temperature. Oregon's never really had to go to Utah or Salt Lake City and play in really, really just terrible cold weather. They've always kind of gotten lucky there. So that's like my first fear of the schedule is just what happens if it's a really nasty November weekend in Madison, and what's that going to be like? Because you're traveling across the country to get there, and then you got to play in cold temps. It's a new place to play, and no one's been there except for Joe Lorig, your Oregon's special teams coach. And then Wisconsin's good. Like they're that team that we've actually already pegged them as kind of Oregon's new Stanford, like the team that plays physical football. They play good defense, and for whatever reason, even though Oregon's got better athletes, like this matchup's always going to be just tough for Oregon, no matter what it is. Yeah, same color too. So like that's kind of one that like we've kind of pegged Duck territory, kind of like that game just feels like it's going to be tough no matter what the record is. And until we see them blow them out, and you kind of have to bank on the fact that it's going to continue to be tough. But I don't know if it's a trap game. It's definitely not a trap game. even though Washington's lost a lot of talent from its championship runner-up championship team last season, you still got to beat them, and you haven't. And until you do, that's one that it's just, hey, all hands on deck. And until you actually show that you can beat this team, there needs to be some doubt in the air going into that game.
How do you define success for this Oregon team? We talked on Cover 3. For Georgia, it's basically, I think, you better get to the national title game. For Ohio State, it's, I think, better get to the national title game or at least beat Michigan and win the Big Ten. What is it for Oregon? Like, get there and win a ball game? Is it get there and win two? How do you see it?
Yeah, that's a tough one because if this was in the Pac-12 conference, I would say you need to get to the Final Four to call it a success. But with the newness of a new league and traveling across the country for the first time, playing a lot of opponents you don't really play for the first time, and environments that you haven't seen, I would probably argue like getting to the college football playoff and then winning a game would be viewed as a success. So getting to the quarterfinals in that regard. I think they're 1B to Ohio State's 1A of being the favorites to win the conference in the Big Ten. So if you do get to the conference championship, you better get further than the quarterfinals of the college football playoff. But I just think you take a little bit step back, look at all the newness that's going to come into this season. And yeah, those Big Ten teams are going to have to adjust as well to traveling to the West Coast multiple times. How does Ohio State handle that, during the rigors of a regular season, not a non-conference season? But I would view it as kind of getting to the playoffs, winning a game. There'd be some disappointment if that's all you did. But I think after the sting of a loss wears off, fans will probably look back at it and say, yeah, we were successful. We were a top 10 team. We got to the college football playoff. We won a game in the college football playoff. And we were a win away from getting to the Final Four. That's kind of where I would probably peg it.
Absolutely. Matt, always enjoy your work over Duck Territory. Odds and Audibles as well. An awesome podcast that all you guys do. Everybody check out Duck Territory. We'll see you next time, man.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.